Hello everybody, Amia here, welcome back to my channel. A few weeks ago we did my best, most favorite books of 2025, and today we are going to be talking about the books that disappointed me the most. I've seen people do the best and the worst, but I feel like disappointing is probably a good way to go about talking about the books I didn't like this year, because I am a chronic DNFer. So if I don't like a book and I feel like it's dragging, I will just DNF and call it a day. I don't particularly feel bad about DNFing books. I see DNFing as divesting myself of things I don't want. So it's not hard at all for me to DNF books. However, I did like most of the books that I persevered through. But there are just some books that didn't live up to whatever expectation I had of them, or they just weren't what they were portrayed to be, and that's what I'm going to be talking about today. My reviews and thoughts and feelings of these books are not a personal attack. As much as I want to hear from people who also didn't enjoy these books, either for similar reasons or even different reasons, I also want to hear from the people who did enjoy them. Because why not? This is not a space just for people who agree with me. It's a space for everyone, as long as we can be respectful of one another. So if you did like these books, please share your thoughts. Maybe you can introduce me to a perspective that I may or may not have considered based on my own limited life experiences, and maybe we just don't have the same taste, but you want to have a discussion. I'm open. Let's get into it. The first book on the list is Funny Story by Emily Henry, and I know this book is very much beloved by romance readers, women's fiction readers, Emily Henry fans, and it pains me to say that I haven't come across another Emily Henry book that I love besides Book Lovers. And if you've been watching me for a while, or you've watched my video about my favorite romance books of all time, you will see that Book Lovers is on there. I have read Book Lovers so many times. I have annotated the hell out of my Book Lovers book. Charlie is ideal. That is an ideal man. Nora is a character that I heavily related to, and I think there's a part of me that has been wanting to find another Emily Henry book that I love, because I find it to be mind-boggling that I could love Book Lovers to the extent of putting it amongst my favorite books of all time, but also seemingly can't find another book of hers that I love. So People We Meet on Vacation was probably the first book of hers that I read. I did not like it. Emily Henry tends to write in one character's perspective, so you don't have the guy's perspective, you only have the girl. For me to enjoy a book, like I've said this previously, I desperately need to like the character, or I need to be able to relate to them in some way. Even if they're not very likable, I still need to feel connected to them in some way. I need to understand where their unlikability comes from, and the unlikability needs to make sense. I've read books about characters I haven't liked, but even though I don't like certain traits about them, it does make sense within the context of the story. But with Poppy, I just really struggled to connect with her. I couldn't stand her. And at the end of People We Meet on Vacation, I just wasn't convinced that Poppy and Alex should be together, which goes against the whole idea of a romance, because you should really be rooting for the main couple. But there were so many things about them and their story that I just didn't like. Beach Read. The thing about Beach Read is I did enjoy Beach Read the first time I read it, which was like years ago. And it was at the beginning of me coming back to reading. And I tried to read Beach Read again, but I just wasn't connecting to it. So I think it's one of those books where I did like it at the start when I wasn't reading enough and when I hadn't refined my taste. Happy Place is my worst Emily Henry book. I have heard so many people speak so positively about it and how it has impacted them and how much they love the characters. But to put it simply, there was nothing happy about Happy Place for me. I wasn't rooting for anyone. I didn't like anyone. I didn't like the story. I didn't like the couple. I didn't like anything about the book. I just couldn't get behind anything that happened in Happy Place, and I have so many complaints. After Happy Place, I was like, I'm gonna give Emily Henry maybe a couple more chances just to see if she was a bit of a one-hit wonder for me. So I decided to read Funny Story by Emily Henry. The thing about Funny Story is I do understand why people like Funny Story, and I think it is a much better book than People We Meet on Vacation, and I also think it's much better than Happy Place. But I kind of found myself not connecting to either Daphne or Miles, and that is imperative for me. I cannot love a romance book in which I'm not connected to either of the characters. Daphne felt to me like rather than a relationship, she needed to delve deeply more into herself, and she needed to maybe pour in more time into self-discovery and who she is outside of the context of being romantically tied to anybody. It felt like she very much jumped from one relationship to the other without a break, without a pause, without reflecting. I also feel like this story could have been about somebody who went through what Daphne went through, and then rather than go into a different relationship, she would have just taken time to get to know herself, to travel, to do all the things that she had previously deprived herself of doing and enjoying and loving, and put more effort into being less of a people pleaser, less of what people expect her to be, and more of who she actually is. But Daphne and Miles' relationship kind of felt like a convenient arrangement rather than something that was meant to be. It felt like something that happened as a result of proximity and maybe even loneliness. It's like, okay, this person is here, I'm here, we're both single, our ex-partners are both together, we'll just be together. That's kind of what it felt like to me. It didn't feel like there was any kind of deep connection between them besides the shared experience that they had been through. By the time that they got serious, or by the time that they got into the thick of being in a relationship or sleeping together, it didn't feel as though they had done the work. It felt forced to me, and I don't know whether it was due to my state of mind at the time, whether it was due to outside factors, but to me, their relationship, their connection felt kind of surface level. And I usually enjoy banter between couples in my books, but again, I felt myself not connecting. I wish I loved it, because there's so many people that I know who loved it as well, but I didn't feel interested in them together, and I didn't feel invested in them. I am curious, for the people who loved Funny Story, do you also like other Emily Henry books? And if so, which ones do you love? I want to know that I'm not going crazy here. Maybe it's that I don't connect to Emily Henry's writing, and Book Lovers was a lucky discovery for me. I'll be curious to know about people who did and didn't enjoy the book, and just to see what you guys thought of it. The next book on my list is Merry Inkmas by Talia Hibbert. And before you ask me, I also never thought that I would have a Talia Hibbert book in my least favorite of the video, because I love Talia Hibbert. I have read her Brown Sisters trilogy, and they are proudly displayed on my shelf. I love those books. I love the characters that she creates. I love the fact that she writes about Black women who are confident, and like everybody else, they have their faults, but their faults don't rule their lives. They are allowed to just be, to just exist. And so I was really excited about this book. This was my first novella by Talia Hibbert, which maybe that's the problem. Maybe I connect more to her full-length books. There are some parts of it that I enjoyed. I love the fact that her characters are quite sex positive and everything, but I feel like the romance between the two characters in this book was very hot and cold, and the male main character was kind of like an asshole sometimes, and I just don't really love an asshole in terms of an MMC. I prefer them to be just not assholes. I just don't connect to books that feature asshole MMCs, and I know that about myself. And unless I feel like there is a reason that makes it justified, it just comes across as very unnecessary to me and something that I could do without. And I think he toyed with the female main character a lot, and it kind of put me off the story at times. Bailey was very sweet and very kind and very loving, and I just wanted her to be with somebody that gave her as much love as she readily gave to other people. And Cash felt a bit more like hot and cold. Sometimes he was this way, and then sometimes he was other ways, and it just felt very disconnecting. It would kind of take me out of the story sometimes, and it was very inconsistently paced. I found myself kind of bored at the beginning, then I got really interested in the middle, and then by the end it kind of had tapered off because I was essentially tired of the story. And so I feel like if it was a bit more consistently paced and there was a bit more consistent characterization, then I probably would have enjoyed it more. But since that was not the case, it just kind of fell flat for me, which was a shock to my system, because that has never happened with Talia Hibbert, and I hope it never happens again, because I don't think I can take another Talia Hibbert disappointment. You don't want your favorite authors to disappoint you. The next book on my list is Role Model by Rachel Reid, and this is actually in the Game Changer series, the one that features heated rivalry and The Long Game. The Long Game is probably one of my favorite romances of all time. I absolutely love that book, even more than Heated Rivalry, which a lot of people love and a lot of people are obviously raving about, especially recently with the show coming out. So I was quite excited to read the rest of the series just to see, and I think Role Model is definitely one of the more disappointing books in the series. It was between Troy and Harris. I just felt like ultimately it was a bit bland. It felt like kind of eating white rice with nothing else. It was not giving me anything. And if I'm going to be honest, admittedly, I think that I hold a grudge against Troy that I wasn't able to drop by the end of the book. I do understand why he was as horrible of a person as he was prior to his own book and prior to his own personal experiences and discoveries. But I feel like there's a part of me that was unwilling to forgive him for his past actions and the hurt that he had caused other people around him. And I think that definitely contributed to the overall negative feeling that I had about the story, because I just couldn't let go of what he had done. The brighter spots about this book were definitely the cameos from previous characters that we had seen across the other stories, especially Ilya, because Ilya is a gem and everybody loves to see an Ilya cameo. The brightest part of a book should not be side characters, and I find that with this book that's kind of what it was. It was bland. I didn't feel connected to either, but I hope that as a couple that they're happy, and I wish them all the best. But I just don't think that it's a book that I will ever think about, and that's okay. The next book on my list is Fakers with Benefits by Willow Dixon. It's the second book in the Crimson Club series. The first book I absolutely loved, so I went into this hoping that I would love this as much. But when it came to Avon and Nick's story, I just found myself kind of bored. There were parts of it that I loved. I loved how outspoken Nick was. The ways in which he was unconventional, I really liked. I don't want to spoil the book for you, especially if you're planning on reading it. But I didn't really like the development of the story. It felt very slow, and then when he did pick up, it just felt out of place, especially with the whole stalker side plot. There was a lot of drama, but not enough grounding development, which I think really affected the course of the book. This is a bit of an unpopular opinion, but I don't really think Nick needed a book. He was a brilliant side character, but I think this is one of the books that makes me feel like not every side character needs a book. And it's the first time that I've ever felt that way, because typically if I'm reading a book in a series and I discover a side character that I really like, my instinct is to say, oh, I wish we could find out about this person. But I think this is a book that really defies the thought that just because you like a side character, you would also like their book. Or maybe I'm just wrong, and maybe just because it just wasn't a good book, but doesn't mean that he doesn't deserve it. Does that make any sense? Like, just because I didn't enjoy the book doesn't mean that the character, it just needs to be better written, essentially. And then something that kept taking me out of the story, this is actually a bit of a new discovery for me. Nick was very Gen Z. And this is not some kind of insult because I'm Gen Z. But I've never really known the reason why I gravitate towards historical romances. And this book is a prime example of why I think the proximity to present day put me off and kept taking me out of the story. Because I feel like when I read, primarily I'm trying to escape, I think. And I'm trying to immerse myself in a world that is unfamiliar. And so the closer a book is in proximity to present day and my own reality, I think there's a part of me that's put off by it, especially if it's blatant and very in your face. And this book definitely had elements like that, like the things he would say and the words he would use and the slang. I was just like, oh, this is very Gen Z, which I'm not the person who likes to insult generations, especially generations of people that I belong to, but it was a bit too much. It's the same feeling when I'm reading a book and people are mentioning designer brands, or when they're mentioning contemporary music artists, or even things like the TV show The Crown. The closer it gets to present day and to the people who are still alive, the less interest I have in it. And I think this book kind of suffers from that. I just didn't like the book. I felt like it was very heavy on the drama, heavy on the Gen Z, and it kept taking me out of it, and I wasn't able to properly immerse myself in the story, which has not happened before with the Willow Dixon book. But if anybody has continued the series, please let me know if it gets any better, because I am intrigued about whether or not I was just lucky with the first 5 books, and it's only downhill from there. The next book is Shameless, Puckboy, and that is from the Puckboy series with Eden, Finley and Saxon James. And this is, I think, book 3 in the series. It follows Lane and Oscar. Oscar, I have to say, is the most off-putting man in this series. I'm not even joking. I will say, these are not the best written books out there, but they are fun, and you kind of know what you're getting when you read books like these. They're not aiming to be like the best written books out there. They're just wanting you to have a good time, which I can get on board with. But I think with this book, all the things that he did, all the mistakes he made, him essentially needing to be assigned a babysitter as a grown man, I just thought that was extremely off-putting. He felt contrary, but not with a purpose, because he just wanted to be contrary and because he's an agent of chaos. He has serious problems that he really should work through with a therapist. I just found it ridiculous that they were putting all this effort into trying to keep this grown man on track in a world where people would kill to be in his position. People would kill to be in professional hockey, and people would do the job that is required of him well and without all the drama that he puts people through. People say that he's like Ezra, but I don't really think he's like Ezra. I think Ezra ultimately felt like a better character than Oscar. Oscar was just too much, and I felt like Lane was too old to be so obsessed with Oscar in the way that he was. I was like, what is it about this man that is keeping you hooked? Because he treats you like shit. He has no regard for anybody, not even himself. People who have no respect for themselves as a baseline, why would they have respect for anyone else? And so he got into this role of being a babysitter. It just felt wrong on all levels, this book. There was nothing about it that I enjoyed. The excuses that were made as to why he was the way he was, I just wasn't moved by it. I wasn't connected to it. I didn't think that what he had been through justified his behavior. And I just did not understand what Lane saw in him. And I thought Lane should have had more maturity, should have had more just conviction, I guess. I don't know how you guys are able to stand this man for more than 5 minutes at a time. He was absolutely insufferable. And I don't understand the love this book has, because it's rated at 4.03 on Goodreads. They would make progress and then he would just repeat the bad behavior and then unravel people's efforts. And I was just like, please, this is a man-child that needs to get help. And the help that he needs is not one that comes from a romantic partner. It's one that has to sit down and deal with why you are the way you are and address your issues head on without throwing everybody's efforts into the bin continuously. It just felt very immature, and it was annoying to say the least. The thing about liking somebody like Oscar or supporting somebody like Oscar is that they paint the person who's helping them in such a bad light because they come across as not having spine, because Oscar is just so unbearable and just so... anyways, he does get better, but at the end of it, you're just like, what was the actual point? It didn't feel like there was an actual point to the story, and I think that's what made it such a disappointing book to me. Next book on my list is Breakaway by Avon, Gale. This is the first book in the Scoring Chances series, and the thing is that I've actually liked other books in the Scoring Chances series, but this as a start was very rough. The author tried to write Lane as a very awkward character, but it ended up feeling like a shtick. He didn't feel like a real person. He felt like what a non-awkward person thinks an awkward person should be. And it felt more like checking off some kind of list rather than actually infusing his tendencies and his traits into a person that should have more than that. It felt like being awkward was all that he was and all that he would ever be, and so it made the book feel very chaotic. Sometimes it actually felt like whiplash as well. You would be like, what's happening? And then it would veer to something else. It was a short book, I'll give it that, but it felt like something that you would write on a drunken night out. There was no flow, there was no development, and I just never felt that they were a couple. They had their fun, but they didn't really come across as being in love, and they didn't have all the elements of all the things that I really like about a romance book, or all the things that make me love a couple together. And then the way that Lane talked to his best friend, who was a girl, made me really uncomfortable as well. I just wasn't a fan of how he kind of objectified her, and it's something that you can overlook because again, Lane is into men. So it's something that you can say, well, at least there is not the idea in the back of his mind that he wants to sleep with her. But I just think that he unnecessarily disrespected her at times and talked about her as if she wasn't a person. It put me off the book, it put me off Lane. It also wasn't framed as a problem, which if it's something that was included, but then the author is well aware that it's a problem or is highlighting it as a problem, then I would understand. But the thing is that it wasn't. It was framed as something that like an awkward person would do. And that just didn't sit right with me. So ultimately suffers from not very good writing, not very good pacing, not very good development, and not very good characterization. And it is undoubtedly the weakest book in the series, and it's something that honestly I would skip altogether if you were going to read this series. You're not going to miss anything by skipping this book, but you won't go into the series with this book being what you started with. The next book on my list is Not That Complicated by Isabel Murray. This book follows Adam and Reid. They had a previous encounter that didn't leave the best taste in either of their mouths. Ultimately, what they have is a relationship in which I didn't really feel like the dynamic was equal. This is another book that suffers from writing an awkward character, but maybe not even intentionally, making them a bit of a clown rather than somebody who is a person, somebody who has inherent value. but also is awkward and is not your stereotypical man or woman. It just feels like you've made a character. At times, it felt like Ray was the butt of people's jokes and he wasn't in on it. It's not something that he volunteered to do. It felt like other people were in on the joke and he wasn't. And that is not a dynamic that I enjoy, whether it's in books or whether it's in real life. I just don't really think that from the person that is in that position, it is probably one of the worst places to be. And I felt like that for Ray at times. And also because he was the older character, there was a significant age gap between Ray and Adam, I believe like 10 years. So you have Adam, who is in his early 20s and is developmentally a lot more mature presenting and behaving than Ray. And then you have Ray, who is in his 30s but comes across as a teenager. And I don't mind a character being awkward because, again, like, who cares? But I think I mind when the awkwardness is a plot device as opposed to a personality trait that is just one of the many things that they are. So reading the book kind of felt like being in the audience of a show about Ray's life in which he's relentlessly being made fun of. It was a lot of talking, too much internal rambling. We didn't get Adam's perspective either. So again, I didn't understand why Adam was so taken by Ray because I wasn't able to see Ray through his eyes. And then the only insight we had was Ray, and he is not very confident. He's very frantic and it's just a lot. Ray was a lot. And unless you are prepared or being in somebody's head like that is something you enjoy, it does take away from the overall story. It did start out strong, I will say, and I did like the mystery element to it, but I think eventually there was just a lot of repetition of the same themes and not enough development, because something can start off one way and then develop in a way that feels natural and feels progressive, but this just kind of felt regressive and maybe not fleshed out, and it ended up affecting my overall view of the book. I didn't understand why Adam liked Ray. I understood why Ray was attracted to Adam, I guess, but I didn't really understand why he liked Adam either, to be honest. There were things that were hinted at within the book that we never really got to see, again, because the pacing was off and the author probably felt like they didn't have enough time to put in the ideas that they had woven through the book at the end when they did get together. So it did disappoint me. But I can tell that the author has promise, and I'm not shutting the door. So another book by her is something that I might be willing to read sometime in the future. I don't think she's a bad writer, but I do think that it did suffer from all the things that I mentioned. The last book on my list is Dream Camp by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. Much like Mary Inkmas, it pains me to put a book of an author that I really admire on my most disappointing books of the year. Chimamanda has had a hiatus, so she hadn't published a full-length novel in a really long time. I've watched interviews with her and she did say that she had writer's block. She lost both her parents, and if you know anything about Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, is that she was very close to her parents, and those losses must have been extremely devastating for her. I can't imagine going through two of the biggest griefs you ever experience and then writing a book simultaneously. I imagine that would have been really difficult. So this book comes out and I was excited to read because I have enjoyed pretty much all of Chimamanda's books. So enjoying a Chimamanda book is just at this point something that I expect. And this book is complicated. I do have a review of it in which I go in depth, but I think what happened to this book is that it felt disconnected. The ladies felt disjointed at points because it was in each of their POVs, one after the other, and I just kind of felt like it was very male-centered. And this may be my own issue, but I am at a point in life where I know it makes me uncomfortable to say, and these are obviously my own biases popping up, but in 2025 it makes me uncomfortable to see women put so much of their worth into their ability to be romantically linked to a man. And this book, despite being about 4 women, the male presence was there. And it broke my heart to see not only how ingrained they all were in the effects of the patriarchy and the world we live in, but I think it made me sad to see that despite so much effort put into all of these things and to achieve these things, none of them got what I would imagine is a happy ending. When I finished the book, I didn't finish it thinking that these women have grown, and the conclusion of their stories feel like even though they went through hard times and even if they had these thoughts that weren't necessarily their fault, because obviously they've been programmed since birth to want a relationship, to want marriage, to want kids, to want all those things that women are told that we need in order to be women. But at the end of it, I think what upset me the most is I didn't feel like each of them got an ending that they deserved. The book felt incomplete. It felt like maybe even 4 individual books that didn't really have any business being together, besides the fact that these ladies know each other in real life. That said, I do think it's a book that needs to exist, and this is the thing about nuance. Just because I didn't really enjoy this book doesn't mean that I cannot see the benefits of it. I do understand what the benefit of a book like this existing is, because I guess you could take it as a sort of guide, especially if you are a young woman who is trying to figure out themselves. You can take it as a guide to how to approach life, because at the end of the day, it does portray a very realistic view of women and the thoughts in our heads. And I think for that reason, it's a book that needs to exist, and it feels like an important book, but I can't help but feel disappointed because it didn't give me what I wanted, and it didn't give me what I was looking for, and it didn't give me a resolution that I could aspire to, or that I could take and apply to my own life. And I think that's probably what made me the saddest, is that I left the book feeling like there's still so much work that these women need to do, and their stories feel incomplete. I'm at a point in my life where I enjoy seeing women empowered, and I enjoy seeing them recognize the harms of the patriarchy. I don't think there's any problem with wanting a romantic relationship or anything like that, but I think I'm at a point where I kind of want to read books or talk to people who are trying to make it out of those beliefs that they've been taught, or making efforts to detach themselves from the clutches of patriarchy. And that's just not what I got from this book, and that was disappointing to me. It didn't feel like her best work. I am curious to see what else she writes in the future. As far as all her books are concerned, this is the one that I have liked the least. And it kind of hurts because it's an important story, and I feel like it could have done with more development, and there are a few things that could have been tweaked here and there to make it a better book, but ultimately it did fall flat for me, and it took me months to read it. So it's divided into Chiamaka, Zikora, Omelogo, and Kadiatu, and it wasn't until we got to Omelogo and Kadiatu that I really started to enjoy the book, because if I'm going to talk about one of the brighter sides of this book, Omelogo is probably one of my favorite characters in any book ever. She has her faults. She has a myriad of problems that she needs to work through, but ultimately I felt like she was the only one that wasn't living in this bubble of viewing men at the top of the food chain and willing to take all the little crumbs that they give her. She was the one I felt was really on the path towards dismantling certain thoughts. Kadiatu's story was heartbreaking. Emotionally, she probably impacted me the biggest. On one hand, I felt so sorry for her because she had been through so much in her life, like so much. But I also felt in awe of her because I thought to myself, if you've been through that much and you can still come out the way you've come out, that takes conviction. That takes a spirit that just cannot be broken. And it made me very in awe of her and her character. So it's an important book, but I did think it was disappointing and it didn't live up to expectation in a way that I expected it to, because it's Chimamanda and I expected more. Maybe that's due to my own biases, maybe it's due to where I am in my life at present. Thank you so much for watching this video. This video was very hard to make because I've realized I don't really like putting a lot of negative vibes out there, because I think that the world is a negative place largely, especially on the internet. I feel incensed to put out things that bring light to other people, fun or connection, and so making a video like this, I didn't realize how bad I would feel about it, particularly where my favorite authors are concerned. But I can't sit here and lie. And there are books that disappointed me, and it's only right to say, I just hope that I've been able to do it in a way that is respectful, because I have no interest in hating just to hate. That's another thing that's severely off-putting to me. If I say something is disappointing, or if I say I didn't like it, there has to be a reason. I have to be able to talk about it, to justify it in a way that is constructive. I'm not just going to throw things out there just to hate people or to make them feel bad, because one, it's not a good thing, and two, it does absolutely nothing for me. I would love to know what your most disappointing books of 2025 were, and if you did enjoy any of the books in my list, I want you to tell me why, because my perspective is not the only perspective in the world. There are like billions of us on the planet. There are definitely people who saw it a different way. In fact, I think I'm even slightly more intrigued by people who didn't like something I liked, or people who liked it but maybe for different reasons that I didn't notice. That is intriguing to me. It makes me think, it challenges me, if you will. But yeah, those were my most disappointing reads of the year. I'm hoping that this is a much better reading year than last year was. I'm very excited about what this year is. Not only in terms of what I'm reading and branching out, like I said, I've wanted to do for a long time, but also in terms of content. Creating content about reading and just encouraging more people to read and talk about the books that they've liked and not liked. So let me know what your thoughts are. Thank you so much for the support. Thank you so much for the likes, the comments, the subscriptions. They mean everything to me. If you're not very comfortable even leaving like a full-blown comment, feel free to leave an emoji. I appreciate that as well. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you when I see you. Bye bye.